The sun was setting behind the jagged skyline, casting long shadows over the forgotten train station. The world seemed to hold its breath as Zara Kalin stepped onto the platform, her boots making no sound against the cracked pavement. She was dressed simply in a dark cloak, her face partially hidden by a hood, but there was something about her presence that commanded attention. Her eyes, pale as moonlight, scanned the tracks with an air of urgency. The train station was eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of a distant horn and the wind rustling through overgrown weeds. This place, once alive with travelers, was now a relic of the past, abandoned and left to decay. Yet to Zara, it felt like a warning, a signal that something was amiss. She had been followed. There was no doubt in her mind. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, but every time she turned, the shadows seemed to mock her efforts. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She wasn't alone. Zara had come here to find answers, though she wasn't sure what those answers would be. The betrayal had been swift, like a blade to the chest. Her trust in the people she had once considered allies was now nothing more than a cruel joke. The memories of her past were hazy, scattered like broken glass, and she was beginning to wonder whether they had ever been real at all. There was no time to dwell on those thoughts now. She had to move quickly. The train she had been waiting for was due soon. She had to be on it, before they caught up to her. She glanced over her shoulder again, but this time, something caught her eye. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the platform. Zara's heart skipped a beat. She knew that face. Lorian. Her breath caught in her throat. Lorian, the one person she had trusted more than anyone else, was standing there, watching her with cold, unblinking eyes. His expression was unreadable, his stance rigid. "Zara," he said, his voice like gravel, "I should have known you'd be here." Her hand instinctively reached for the dagger hidden beneath her cloak, though she knew it would do little to protect her against someone like him. Lorian wasn't just another man. He was one of them. "You betrayed me," she said, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. "Why?" Lorian took a step forward, his boots echoing in the silence. "It was never personal," he replied, his voice cold and indifferent. "But you were never meant to be a part of this world. You were a mistake." Zara's grip tightened on the dagger, but before she could make a move, she heard the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against stone. A low growl rumbled from the darkness behind Lorian. It was then that Zara realized she was surrounded. There were more of them, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her mind raced. The train. She had to get to the train, but it was too late. The tracks were already blocked. "You should have stayed away, Zara," Lorian continued, his voice thick with finality. "It's over." Zara's heart raced as she made a split-second decision. She could fight, but she was outnumbered, and the train would be gone soon. Or she could run, flee into the night, with no plan and no destination. She glanced at the tracks, the rhythmic sound of the approaching train growing louder by the second. She ran. Her feet pounded against the cold pavement, her cloak billowing behind her as she sprinted toward the train. She could hear them coming after her, their footsteps quick and heavy. The wind whipped against her face, blurring her vision, but she kept her eyes on the train, focusing on the goal ahead. As she reached the edge of the platform, she jumped onto the moving train just as it began to pull away. She barely managed to cling to the metal ladder, her fingers slipping on the cold rungs. The train lurched forward, and she scrambled up onto the roof, her heart pounding in her chest. She had escaped, for now, but Zara knew this was just the beginning. They would be after her. And this time, there would be no one to save her. She sat down on the roof, her breath ragged, and for the first time in years, allowed herself a moment of stillness. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: the hunt had begun. Dorian Albrecht sat in the dim light of his office, his fingers tapping nervously on the wooden desk. The city outside was alive with activity, its heartbeat pulsing through the thick glass windows. But to Dorian, It felt like a distant memory. The world had shifted, and with it, his purpose had come undone. His loyalty had been shattered, his purpose twisted by a truth he had never known. Zara Kalin. He had failed her. He hadn't seen it coming. The betrayal, the manipulation. He had trusted her completely. They had fought side by side, shared laughter, and even secrets that he had thought were sacred. But all of that had been a lie. She had vanished without a trace, leaving him with nothing but a tangle of questions that gnawed at his mind. He ran his hand through his short, dark hair, staring at the map sprawled out on the desk. It was a map of the city, but it was also more than that. Hidden beneath the surface of the sprawling streets and tall buildings were locations, coordinates, places that meant something more than what they appeared, places that connected to Zara. Dorian had spent days trying to unravel the mystery, his once certain path now clouded by doubt. Every lead he followed only brought more confusion. The people he had trusted, his superiors, his colleagues, had all lied. They had all been part of the game, the vast network of deceit that he had never even realized he was a part of. What had happened to Zara? Where had she gone? He knew, deep down, that he couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even himself. The walls of his office were closing in on him as his thoughts spiraled, the clock on the wall ticking steadily in the background. He was alone, completely and utterly alone. He had always been a solitary figure, a man of few words, but this loneliness felt different. It was suffocating. The silence pressed against him like a weight he couldn't escape. A soft knock at the door broke him from his thoughts. He hadn't been expecting anyone. "Come in," he muttered, barely looking up from the map. The door creaked open, and a woman entered. She was tall, with long black hair that cascaded down her back, and her eyes were a sharp shade of green, almost unnaturally bright. Her presence filled the room with a tension that Dorian could feel in his bones. She was someone important, someone who had a purpose, and he was starting to realize that it wasn't one he was willing to follow. "I thought you might need some company," the woman said, her voice smooth, but with an edge of something colder. She closed the door behind her and leaned casually against the wall. "Or maybe you're just too busy with your little puzzle to talk to the people who can actually help you." Dorian looked up at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. He recognized her instantly. Her name was Illyra Sun, and she was a high-ranking agent working for the organization that he had once been loyal to. But now he wasn't sure where her loyalties lay. "You think I need help?" Dorian asked, his voice flat. "I don't need anyone's help, especially not yours." Illyra smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You think you're the only one searching for answers. You think you're the only one who wants to find Zara." Dorian's fists clenched on the table. "Stay out of this, Illyra. You don't know what you're dealing with." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm dealing with," she said, her tone turning icy. "You think Zara was just some innocent, lost soul. You think she didn't have her own reasons for disappearing. She wasn't the only one in this game, Dorian. She was a part of something much bigger than both of us." Dorian stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't care. He was beyond caring. "I know Zara. I know what she was to me. And I know she would never betray me. Not like that." Illyra's expression softened, but only slightly. "She didn't betray you. She was playing her part, just like you played yours." She stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. "The difference is, you're starting to see the truth. And now you have a choice. You can keep chasing shadows, or you can face the reality of what's really going on." Dorian's mind was racing. She was right, in some twisted way. Everything he thought he knew was slipping through his fingers like sand. The trust he had placed in the organization, in his role, in the mission, all of it was crumbling. What had he been a part of? What was he really fighting for? Illyra paused, her gaze steady. "You're searching for Zara because you think she's the key. But the truth is, Dorian, she's not the only one. You've been kept in the dark, just like everyone else. It's time you learned what's really happening. Dorian swallowed, trying to clear the fog from his mind. He didn't want to listen to her. He didn't want to believe what she was implying. But deep down, he knew she wasn't lying. She wouldn't be here if she wasn't speaking from a place of knowledge. "Tell me what you know," Dorian said, his voice cold. "And be honest with me for once." Elira's lips curled into a faint smile, as if she had been waiting for him to ask. "I know you were never meant to find her, Dorian. You were just a tool, a pawn in a much bigger game. They needed you to believe in the lie, to do the work they asked, and to never question it." Dorian's mind reeled. He had always followed orders, trusted the people in charge. He had believed that what he was doing had meaning. But now, all that meaning seemed hollow, twisted. Had he been played this entire time? "You're telling me it's all been a lie," Dorian whispered, his voice breaking with disbelief. "Not a lie," Elira corrected. "A carefully crafted truth. And now that you're seeing the cracks, you'll understand just how deep the deception goes." Zara wasn't trying to escape Dorian. She was trying to stop what's coming. "And you." She paused, her eyes darkening. "You've just stepped into the heart of it." The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy fog. There were forces at play, forces much larger than he had ever imagined, and he had been a part of them without even knowing. Zara hadn't just disappeared. She had been trying to prevent something. But what? "I have to find her," Dorian said, more to himself than to Elira. "You're already too late," Elira replied, her voice a quiet warning. "But maybe there's still time. For you. For everyone." Dorian turned away from her, his thoughts swirling. His entire world had just shifted, and he had no idea where he was heading anymore. But one thing was certain. He couldn't stop now. The truth was out there, and he had to find it. Elira watched him, her eyes narrowing slightly. She knew he was a man who wouldn't back down, even when faced with the darkest truths. But there was something else in his gaze now, something she hadn't seen before. A determination. And that was dangerous. The metropolis sprawled beneath Elira's sun, its lights flickering like 1,000 false stars in the endless dark. The city was alive, but not with the energy of hope or progress. Rather, it pulsed with the weight of secrets, of things left unsaid. Beneath the towering skyscrapers, nestled between the crumbling districts, there was always something hidden, always something to uncover. And tonight, Elira was in search of the truth. She leaned against the cold steel railing, gazing out at the horizon, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The mission she had been given was supposed to be simple: find Zara Kalen, bring her back. But the further Elira dug, the more she realized that the mission wasn't about bringing a rogue agent back into the fold. It was about control. It was about power. And the ones pulling the strings were far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. Elira's thoughts returned to Dorian Albrecht, the man who had once been a trusted ally. She had seen the change in him the moment he'd started questioning their orders, the moment the cracks had appeared in his once solid loyalty. But he wasn't the only one whose perceptions had shifted. Elira's own beliefs had started to crumble as well. She had been trained to follow orders, to never question the higher-ups. But now she wasn't so sure. Everything she had been told, everything she had believed, felt like a carefully constructed illusion, a web of lies designed to keep her and everyone else in the dark. She turned her attention to the encrypted file in her hand. It was a message she had intercepted from a confidential source, someone who had once been part of the organization she had served. The file contained a set of coordinates and a warning. Trust no one. Zara knows more than she's telling, and the truth is far more dangerous than you can imagine. The words sent a chill down Elira's spine. What could Zara possibly know that was so dangerous? And why had she disappeared? The truth was slipping further and further from her grasp, and every step she took seemed to bring her deeper into a labyrinth of deception. A soft chime echoed in the quiet of the apartment as her secure phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the message. It was from an unknown contact, but the words were clear. Meet me at the old docks. Midnight. Alone. It was a risk, one she didn't want to take, but something told her this was the lead she had been waiting for. She had no choice but to follow it. The old docks were a forgotten part of the city, their piers rotting away and their warehouses long abandoned. It was the perfect place for secrets to be buried, for deals to be made in the shadows. Elira moved swiftly, her boots hitting the cracked pavement as she navigated the dark streets. The wind carried the scent of salt and decay, and the only sound was the distant crashing of waves against the shore. She reached the docks just as the clock struck midnight. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the water. The place was deserted, save for the dark silhouette of a lone figure standing at the edge of the pier. Elira approached cautiously, her instincts telling her that this was no simple meeting. The figure turned as she drew closer, revealing a face she hadn't expected. It was Dorian Albrecht. "Elira," Dorian said, his voice low and tense. "I knew you'd come." "What is this?" Elira asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Why did you contact me? What do you know about Zira?" Dorian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze flicking nervously to the shadows around them. "There's so much more at play here than you realize. Zira's disappearance. It wasn't just a mission gone wrong. It's the beginning of something much bigger." Elira's heart raced. "What are you talking about?" "I've been digging," Dorian continued, his eyes intense. "I thought I was just looking for her, trying to bring her back. But I was wrong. The organization we serve, they've been hiding something. They've been controlling everything, manipulating people, using us as pawns in their game." Elira stepped back, disbelief crossing her face. "Are you saying everything we've been doing is a lie?" Dorian nodded, his jaw clenched. "Yes. It's all been orchestrated. Zira was part of something. Something she couldn't tell you about. Because if you knew, you wouldn't have trusted her. You wouldn't have trusted any of us." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Elira felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted, and she was struggling to find solid ground again. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice strained. "You could have left. You could have run and saved yourself." Dorian's expression softened, and for the first time, Elira saw the vulnerability beneath the hardened exterior. "I didn't run, Elira, because I can't. I've seen the truth, and now I can't just walk away. I'm not the same man I was before. And neither are you." Elira's mind raced. The truth, the reality of what Dorian was saying, was too much to process. It was like a veil had been lifted from her eyes, but the world she now saw was one she didn't know how to navigate. Who could she trust? Who could she believe? She shook her head, trying to clear the fog. "And Zira, where is she now?" "I don't know," Dorian admitted. "But I think she's been trying to stop what's coming. Whatever it is, it's bigger than both of us. And if we go back now, it could change everything." Elira looked at Dorian, her thoughts tangled. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, but the years of loyalty to her mission were hard to let go of. She had been trained to follow orders, to serve without question. And now, everything she had believed in was crumbling before her eyes. "Do you think we can stop it?" she asked quietly. Dorian didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of resolve and regret. "I don't know, but we have to try." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Elira felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, the burden of knowledge that she couldn't escape. "I can't do this alone," she said finally, her voice steady but uncertain. Dorian nodded, his gaze hardening with determination. "Then we won't be alone. We'll figure this out, together." But even as he spoke the words, Elira knew that nothing would be the same again. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to walk it. But there was one thing she was sure of now. She couldn't stay in the shadows anymore. It was time to step into the light, no matter how dangerous it might be. Dorian and Elira stood together on the docks, the cold wind biting at their skin as they stared out over the water. The distant hum of the city was muffled by the crashing waves, but the tension between them was palpable. Every word they exchanged, every glance, was weighed down by the magnitude of what they were facing. They had crossed a line. There was no going back. The world they had known was beginning to unravel, and now they had to make a choice. So what now? Elira asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but beneath the calm exterior, Dorian could sense the chaos inside her. She was as lost as he was, struggling to make sense of everything they had just discovered. "We follow the trail," Dorian said, his voice low, almost mechanical. "Zara knew something, and she was trying to stop it. We need to find her and figure out what she was trying to prevent. But we're not the only ones looking for her," Elira reminded him, her eyes narrowing. "There are forces out there that want her silenced, and they'll do anything to make sure she doesn't expose what's coming. We can't afford to be reckless." Dorian's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. The moment they had uncovered the truth, they had become targets, just like Zara. But there was no going back. They couldn't stop now, not when they were so close to understanding the full scope of the conspiracy that had been kept hidden from them for so long. "We don't have a choice," Dorian said, his voice hardening with resolve. "If we don't act now, we'll be too late, and this will consume everything." Elira sighed, the weight of the situation settling over her like a dark cloud. She had never been one to back down from a challenge. But this was different. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This was about survival. And survival meant making difficult choices, choices she wasn't sure she was ready to make. "We need to get out of the city," Elira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The organization, whoever is behind all of this, they'll be watching. We're safer if we go underground for now." Dorian nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows around them. "Agreed. But we can't run forever. We need to find answers, and we need to find Zara." They exchanged a look, and without another word, they turned and walked away from the docks. The city loomed behind them, a sprawling labyrinth of concrete and steel. But it wasn't just the city that held secrets. It was everything that had been built upon it. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that their lives, their every move, had been controlled by a force far greater than they had ever imagined. They moved swiftly through the streets, their eyes constantly shifting, alert to any movement in the shadows. Elira led the way, her mind already calculating their next move. There was a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a place where they could regroup and plan their next steps. They had to get there before they were discovered, before anyone realized they were no longer following the script. As they turned a corner, Dorian froze. His eyes locked onto a figure standing in the distance, partially obscured by the dim light. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat that fluttered slightly in the wind. His face was hidden in shadow, but Dorian didn't need to see it to know who it was. He had seen that man before, many times. "Elira," Dorian whispered, his voice tense. "Get down." But Elira was already one step ahead of him. She pulled him into the nearest alley, her movements fluid and practiced. She pressed herself against the cold brick wall, her breath shallow as she waited for the figure to pass. But he didn't. The man's head turned, his gaze sweeping the alleyway. For a moment, Dorian and Elira held their breath, praying they wouldn't be seen. But the man didn't move. He was waiting for them. "We need to move," Elira said quietly, her voice barely audible. Dorian didn't argue. They couldn't afford to be caught. If the man was who Dorian thought he was, it meant they were already in too deep, and that meant they needed to act fast. They ran, their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. Dorian's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced back over his shoulder. The man hadn't followed them, at least not yet. But Dorian knew better than to think they were safe. Whoever that man was, he wasn't alone. They reached the safe house just as the first light of dawn began to break through the horizon. It was a small, inconspicuous building, tucked away behind a maze of narrow streets. Elira quickly unlocked the door, ushering Dorian inside before closing it quietly behind them. The interior was sparse but functional. A few chairs, a small table, and a worn-out couch were the only furnishings. But it was enough. It was a place to rest, to think. And right now, that's all they needed. "We have to find out what Zira knew," Elira said as she collapsed onto the couch, rubbing her temples. "We can't keep running from the truth. We need answers." Dorian nodded, his mind already racing. He had always been a man of action, of precision. But this was different. The answers they sought were buried in layers of deception, and each new revelation seemed to lead to more questions. "Elira," Dorian said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty, "I think we've been looking at this all wrong. Zira's disappearance wasn't just a failed mission. She was trying to warn us. She was trying to stop something." Elira sat up, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "I think she was trying to stop the organization from moving forward with whatever plan they've been preparing." Dorian continued, his mind connecting the dots. She knew it was too dangerous, too powerful. And if she was right, if she knew what was coming, then we're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for the future. Elira stared at him, her eyes wide with realization. "You think we're standing at the edge of something massive?" Dorian nodded, his gaze far away as he processed the weight of what they were about to face. "Yes, I think we're standing on the brink of a war that will change everything." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Elira truly understood the scope of what they were involved in. This wasn't just about a rogue agent. It wasn't just about Zira or the mission they had failed. It was about something far bigger, something that could tear the world apart. "Then we have no time to waste," Elira said, determination setting in. "We need to find Zira. We need to stop whatever's coming. And we need to do it fast." Dorian's eyes met hers, a silent agreement passing between them. The clock was ticking. The world was changing. And they had no choice but to face it head-on, together. The night was thick with tension as Dorian and Elira made their way toward the heart of the city. Their breath misted in the cold air, their footsteps swift and purposeful, but beneath their determination was the knowledge that the endgame was nearing. The secrets they had uncovered, the truths they had pieced together, had led them here, toward an inevitable confrontation. Zira Kalin was the key, the catalyst. She had known everything. The organization's true intentions, the depths of the conspiracy that had been unfolding for years. And now, they were finally on the verge of uncovering the truth. "Elira," Dorian said, his voice low, almost reverent, "if what we're about to face is what I think it is, we have no idea what we're walking into." Elira glanced at him, her gaze unwavering. "We've come this far, Dorian. We're in this together now. There's no turning back." He nodded. They had been through too much to stop now. The fate of the city, of the world, hung in the balance. The two of them had spent hours poring over every scrap of information they could find, following a trail of fragmented data and cryptic messages. They had learned that the organization they had once served was no longer just a group of elite operatives. It was an underground network of shadowy figures who held power over the highest echelons of society. Its true purpose was not to protect, but to control, to manipulate everything from politics to the economy. Zira had been the first to realize this, and that was why she had gone rogue. She had uncovered something so devastating, something so dangerous, that she had chosen to disappear rather than allow it to continue. But now, the time for hiding was over. They arrived at an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, a place that had once been a bustling research facility, but now stood silent and decaying. It was here that Zira had left the last clue, a cryptic message embedded in the facility's central server. "Elira," Dorian said, his hand resting on the door's handle. "This is it. This is where we find out what's really been happening." Elira nodded, her mind racing as she pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, the dim light from their flashlights casting long shadows on the cracked walls. They made their way through the building, the sounds of their footsteps echoing off the walls. The deeper they went, the more it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on them, like they were walking into a trap. Finally, they reached a small room at the back of the building. The server terminal sat at the center, its lights flickering weakly. Elira approached it cautiously, her fingers hovering over the keys as she tried to decipher the password that would grant them access. "This is it," she said, her voice steady, though her hands betrayed her nervousness. Dorian stood beside her, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. "Do it." With a deep breath, Elira entered the password. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of encrypted files. As she navigated through the data, she found a message, one that seemed to be from Zira herself. "I knew you'd come," the message began. "You've already seen the cracks. You've felt the tension. But there's something more, something that will change everything." Elira's heart skipped a beat. She knew that Zira had been trying to warn them, to prepare them for what was to come. The message continued. "They've been manipulating us all. The organization, the so-called protectors, they are the ones who have been orchestrating the chaos. They want to collapse everything, to control it all. But the worst part, they've already set the wheels in motion. The system is rigged, and there's no way to stop it now." Elira's hands shook as she read the words. What does this mean?" Dorian stepped forward, his voice grim. "It means that the organization has already put their plan into motion. Whatever they're trying to do, it's too late to stop it. We have to act fast." Elira swallowed hard. She had been prepared for a lot, but this was more than she could have imagined. The people they had once trusted, the very system they had served, had been the ones pulling the strings all along. The rebellion, the chaos, it had all been part of the plan. "They're going to collapse everything," Elira repeated, her mind racing. "And we're the last ones who can stop them." But as the last of Zira's message faded from the screen, something unexpected happened. The door to the room slammed shut, and the lights flickered off, plunging them into darkness. "Elira," Dorian shouted, grabbing her arm. "We're not alone." The sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows, and before they could react, a figure emerged from the darkness. A tall man, his face obscured by a hood, stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a sinister light. "Elira, Dorian," the man said, his voice cold and calculating. "I've been waiting for you." Dorian's pulse quickened. He knew this man. He had seen him before, in the archives, in the reports. He was one of them, the ones who had orchestrated the entire conspiracy. "Who are you?" Elira demanded, stepping forward, her fists clenched. The man smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "I'm the one who controls everything. The organization you thought you were working for. It's mine. And now, you're out of options." Before either of them could react, the man raised his hand, and a surge of energy crackled through the air. Elira felt herself being thrown backward, slamming into the wall with a force that took her breath away. Dorian was next, his body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The man stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "It's too late. The pieces are in place. You can't stop the inevitable. The world is mine to control." But Dorian wasn't finished yet. With a grunt of effort, he pushed himself up, his muscles aching, but his resolve unbroken. He grabbed a nearby metal pipe and swung it toward the man, catching him off guard. The man staggered back, momentarily disoriented. "Elira, get to the server," Dorian shouted. "We need to stop the plan." Elira didn't hesitate. She charged toward the terminal, her mind racing. She had seen enough to know what had to be done. If she could access the core system and override the commands, they might still have a chance. But the man wasn't done yet. With a snap of his fingers, the room around them trembled, and the walls began to close in. Time was running out. Dorian stepped forward again, meeting the man's gaze with unwavering determination. "You're not the one who controls this world. Not anymore."